Leonardo DiCaprio walked through the quiet streets after a long day. The air was freezing, and the city was cloaked in a heavy winter chill. Snowflakes drifted slowly from the sky, blanketing the sidewalks. The towering concrete buildings looked even colder under the dim glow of streetlights. People hurried past, wrapped in thick coats, eager to escape into the warmth of their homes, cafes, and restaurants. But one person stood still. At the corner of the street, in front of an apartment building, a young woman clutched a trembling cardboard sign. She was wearing nothing more than a thin cardigan. Despite the biting cold, her belly was round. She was heavily pregnant. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow with exhaustion and despair. People glanced at her as they walked by, but no one stopped. No one seemed to care. Leonardo slowed his steps, his eyes catching the words scrawled on the sign she held, "Please help." Without hesitation, he stepped closer. "Hey," he said gently. The woman lifted her head, their eyes meeting, and in that moment, Leonardo saw more than just the cold. He saw the weight of her suffering, the silent battle she had been fighting alone. Her lips trembled as she swallowed hard, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Are you here to tell me to leave?" Leonardo's brow furrowed slightly. I want to know what happened to you." She inhaled shakily, lowering her gaze, and then, slowly, she began to speak. Emily clutched her old, tattered coat tightly around her trembling body. The cold had seeped into her bones, but it wasn't just the freezing air that made her shiver. It was the fear of survival. She wasn't just a woman anymore. She was alone, abandoned, and fighting to keep herself and her unborn child alive. Leonardo listened attentively as she took a shaky breath and began to share her story. "My life changed completely a year ago," she murmured, her gaze drifting far away, as if staring into the past. "My husband, John, was on a military mission. That morning, he sent me a message. 'I love you. I'll see you soon.' I had no idea it would be the last time I'd ever hear from him." Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. "A few days later, there was a knock on my door. 2 soldiers stood outside. Their faces were emotionless, their hands clutching a folded flag. They told me my husband had stepped on a landmine during an operation." Her eyes welled with tears, and instinctively, her hands moved to her belly. "But his body never came back. I never even got to say goodbye." Leonardo felt his breath hitch. There were no words to ease the weight of such a loss. But Emily's nightmare didn't end there. It had only begun. "For weeks I couldn't leave my bed," she whispered. "And then, everything got worse. When my landlord found out I had no way to pay the rent, he threw me out. No hesitation, no pity. 'This isn't a charity,' he told me. 'Not my problem.'" Leonardo clenched his fists. Rage boiled inside him. He wanted to find that landlord, to make him understand the cruelty of what he had done. But as Emily continued, he realized each layer of her suffering was heavier than the last. "They left me on the street, Leonardo, with nothing but a few bags in my growing belly. I had nowhere to go." Her voice broke as she described what came next. "I went to shelters first. They were full. 'Maybe in a few weeks, we'll have space,' they said. But I didn't have weeks. I was starving. My baby was growing, and I had no food." She swallowed hard, her lips trembling. "Then I started looking for work. I went to restaurants, stores, anywhere that would hire me. But they all said the same thing. 'Sorry, but we can't take that risk.'" Emily let out a hollow laugh, one filled with nothing but pain. "So I slept at bus stops, in parks, in the corners of abandoned buildings. Sometimes I just walked for hours, just to keep from freezing." Leonardo narrowed his eyes. He couldn't comprehend how this could happen, how a pregnant woman could be so utterly invisible to society. But Emily's story wasn't over. "One night, a man approached me. At first, I thought he wanted to help." Her hands gripped her coat tighter, but then I realized what he was offering. Leonardo's stomach tightened. "There are other ways for women like you to survive," he said. Emily's voice turned cold. "I was disgusted. I tried to walk away, but he grabbed my arm and pushed me against a wall. When he saw the fear in my eyes, he just laughed. 'No one cares about you,' he whispered. 'Remember that.'" Leonardo exhaled sharply. "I managed to run," Emily said, her voice now barely above a whisper. But that night, I understood something. Her head dropped, her hands trembling. No one sees me. People walk past me every day, but they never really look. Hundreds of people, thousands of footsteps, and not a single one of them stopped to ask, why is this woman standing here? Leonardo inhaled deeply. He could feel the anger, the injustice burning inside him. How could the world be so indifferent? How could they walk past her and feel nothing? Emily lifted her gaze, locking eyes with him. That's why I'm here, holding this sign. Because I have no other choice. Leonardo glanced at her hands. They were bruised and purple from the cold. But even more heartbreaking was the absence of hope in her eyes. Right then and there, he made a decision. He was going to change this. Leonardo looked at Emily, his voice calm but firm. You won't sleep on the streets anymore. Emily blinked, as if she hadn't fully processed his words. Leonardo continued, I have a house. It's empty. You'll stay there until you give birth, and I'll cover all your expenses. Her lips parted, but no words came out. A look of disbelief spread across her face. You're serious? Leonardo nodded. Yes. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone truly wanted to help her. That night, Leonardo took her to his home. It was warm, safe, and for the first time in months, Emily felt secure. But Leonardo knew this wasn't enough. Leonardo decided to organize a charity event to share Emily's story. This wasn't just about helping one woman. It was about giving hope to many like her who were struggling to survive. The media, social platforms, and philanthropists all came together for a grand evening. The event hall was filled with people eager to contribute. When Leonardo stepped onto the stage, he held a letter telling Emily's story. The room fell silent as he spoke. Tonight, we're not just helping a woman in need, we're honoring the legacy of a hero who gave everything for his country. By the end of the night, $100,000 had been raised for Emily and her unborn child. But Leonardo had an even greater vision. One day, that child would grow up. He would ask about his father, and Leonardo wanted to make sure he knew his father was a hero. So he set up a scholarship fund to cover the child's education through university. Days passed, and Emily was admitted to the hospital. Finally, the moment arrived. Her son was born. When Leonardo visited the hospital, Emily's eyes were filled with gratitude. Holding her newborn close, she turned to Leonardo, tears slipping down her face. You'd never ask this, but if it's okay, can I name my son Leonardo? Leonardo paused for a moment before smiling. You don't have to do that. Emily shook her head firmly. But I want to, because you saved his life. That day, Leonardo knew he had done more than change the lives of a mother and her child. He had kept a hero's name alive, and perhaps that was one of the greatest things a person could do.